Well, today is a big day because I may finally be believed in what I've been saying for so long. So the police contacted me last evening and said that they would like to listen to me and have offered the opportunity for me to tell them what's going on in the neighborhood. So I feel very blessed about that. This is a phone call to the officer who will hopefully save my life. I've waited so long for this, and I'm nervous to call because if he doesn't believe me, then I'm going to continue to have problems. I'm going to continue to be misunderstood. I'm going to continue to be misdiagnosed. I'm going to continue to have a scarred reputation around town, and that's a lot. And it's all because the police don't believe me. I've got the proof. I've got a lot of proof. I wouldn't spend years of my life going down a rabbit hole if I thought I was wrong. I've got all the information correct. And all my friends abandoned me and did not listen. All of my neighbors unknowingly sabotaged me because they were following orders from the or instructions from the police not to talk to me, saying that everything I'm experiencing is a mental illness when I've been suffering the effects of remote neuromonitoring and being slowly killed and unable to save my own life. No time like the present, right? Here we go.
How we doing, sir?
Good. How are you doing today, Officer Lutz?
Doing well. We're just finishing up at the gym, so
Oh, that's great.
Good timing.
I'm glad to hear it.
What's going on? And kind of give me. I mean, Castro kind of gave me some illusion as to what was going on with some frustrations.
Yeah.
I kind of want to get those wrapped up and figure out how we can better move forward.
That sounds wonderful. I appreciate you reaching out to me so much. Basically, what has happened is some people came into the neighborhood posing as the government and telling my neighbor lies. I found out about that this last summer when I got the 911 transcripts. And the lies are pretty scandalous and have kind of ruined my life. And my neighbor believes that they were really the government, but they lied about my arrest record and they lied about my using. So I'm not real sure how to remedy that situation, but my neighbor needs to understand the truth of what's going on. So what I really need from the police is to hear the evidence that I have of the 911 tapes and then go over and talk to my neighbor about what's happened because she was scammed.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I mean, and a bunch of different offenses have occurred, especially if you're posing as a state or elected official or an officer.
Right.
You are not one. So, especially if they have like a Ring doorbell camera or anything, like would have picked them up.
Oh, that would have been. I never even thought of that. That would be excellent. So actually, Patty can help out in this if she understands what happened. I was able to file a report, and I can give you that report number if you want. That would be excellent. Unfortunately, what happened to it is it became a miscellaneous incident, and it was never investigated. So I never really had a chance to talk with anybody about it. So,
Gotcha.
um,
Well, and that's a lot because the telephone reporting unit, and that's not on you. That's something that we have to refine and work on just to get a better workflow. Because we're about ready to lose about 300 some more officers. So.
oh my gosh, you guys don't want to lose anymore.
It's reimagining public safety, so
right.
Where we're at right now, I'm like, and of course, there's not really an infrastructure in place to pick up the slack. So
right.
That's kind of what we're dealing with right now, and a huge concern to me when we had our last press conference from our division. In terms of being like, well, we're going to start only responding to like these things. I was like, you're going to have a lot of public people who are going to feel like, well, then who does everything else?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it and going, hopefully someone.
exactly.
So, okay, so what information, if you don't mind me asking, did they disseminate, and what was their intention, and why do you think, like, this would be something that happened and happened now?
This happened actually in 2019. Okay, and I found out about it this last summer when I got the proof. I knew something was up in the neighborhood, but I couldn't tell exactly what was going on. And then I got the proof. They came and they lied about my arrest record. They told Patty that I had been arrested in D.C., that I got in trouble for what was on my computer. None of that happened. They spoke with me too, and they were in plain clothes. I knew right away that they weren't the Secret Service, but they have fooled my neighbor, and she has performed 22 hospitalizations on me in a 4-year time period, and I think it's to try and get me to move out of the neighborhood, based off of whatever additional lies that I don't know about that were told to her. So I need dialogue opened up between her and I think that the police would be able to do that if she understood that they were, cons and criminals.
Okay, so it's interesting that, like, I don't even know why they would go to her. And even the Secret Service, of all people, would be investigating something like that. If there was something on your computer or something of a concern, it would have been the FBI.
Right.
So it's just almost on its surface to do like a quick Google search for her to say, like, what agency would be in charge of whatever has been alleged.
Yeah. Like, I actually have the tape right here. If you want me to play it, where she mentions the Secret Service. Do you want to hear it real briefly?
Yeah, if you want to share that.
Okay, here you go.
Gone to Washington D.C. and anyways, they
Secret Service.
Yeah, Secret Service.
Did they say why they were there?
Yeah, they did say why they were there because he drove to Washington D.C. with his computer to share with the president information that was on his computer, and the Washington police arrested him, and so he then drove home, and then the Secret Service followed him or something. But anyways, he gave the Secret Service my name, and they came to my house, and we talked, and I said what a nice man he is.
So that's part of it. And then I've got...
The thing, too, is that she didn't even suggest Secret Service. Our dispatcher did.
Right. There was a part...
Like, yes.
There was a part before that I was unable to play. because I had the volume down and I turned it back up, that I missed. But she was the one that initiated, that the Secret Service came to her. And then the dispatcher goes, Secret Service? So there's that. And then there was another neighbor, because what I did was I got all the 911 transcripts that have been associated with my address to try and see if I could figure out what the problem and misunderstanding was in the neighborhood. Well, this other neighbor...
Was she frauded by chance?
I'm sorry?
Did she experience any financial fraud?
No, there was no financial fraud that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I don't know. I know that she's had a lot of people over there, and probably if she thought I was some sort of criminal or something, then she would have gotten people involved to try and get me out of the neighborhood, thinking that I'm a bad influence in the neighborhood.
Well, I'm just thinking of the Secret Service's scopes, which is obviously the people they protect. So, like, on your computer, you're threatening, I don't know, say, Trump or something like that.
Right.
And they would feel compelled to, find something that you want to, threats against some of their protectees.
But what they would...
doing financial crime. That's the other thing they do, and then that's it.
Right. That is it, and that's the problem. That's how I know that they are absolute imposters. Now, why they would come into the neighborhood, it's a good question. And I think it was to try and get me to move out of the neighborhood. I had a previous tenant that I evicted. And his name is Ryan DeLaha. I can give you his information. But he texted me about a year afterwards asking if his plan had worked. He had spoken to another neighbor. And this other neighbor actually came into my home with his son and Ryan while I was here, stayed for about 10 minutes and left. I thought nothing of it at the time. But as it turns out, I think that lies were said to him about me as well, and then those got over to Patty. So there's just like this miscommunication thing going on in the neighborhood that just simply needs addressed. I don't want anybody to get into trouble for things. I think that my neighbors have been misinformed, and I want to get that straightened out. The thing with the hospitalizations occurring, my neighbor believes that I'm mentally ill and has performed all sorts of hospitalizations that have disrupted my life. I'm really kind of pissed at her for all of this trouble that she's created in my life, and I need to get that part resolved as well. But that's something kind of different and something that hopefully she'll be able to talk with me about directly. I think that the people that came into the neighborhood probably told her to not tell me anything, and that's why she's remaining silent. Whatever the case is, I need that addressed so that we can have open dialogue. So
yeah, it seems like to me too, it's a lot to unpack because one, talking about mental health and stigma of mental health, regardless of whether you had to go and seek medical assistance, it would be the same as if somebody breaks their arm, you have to go places to get back to baseline.
Right.
And so it's concerning to me that there is what area? You're in Clintonville, correct?
I am in Clintonville.
Okay, so that's supposed to be the bastion of everything. This is not really on you guys, but when we get to meet with the civic associations and things,
right,
that it's supposed to be the most warm, inviting place, the most educated place.
Right.
So, and I'm just like, well, when I'm responding to some issues there, I was like, it seems like you guys are more informed than you are responsive. So when it actually comes down to treating people or dealing with conflict, I was like, it seems like you guys don't use that information and respond accordingly.
Right.
It's what I tend to find.
The only reason that I mentioned that part is because at the time, all I had was the disease of addiction. But I believe that she was told that I had some sort of major severe mental disorder. And that made her call in to Netcare and the police all the time. And after 22 hospitalizations, I do have a diagnosis now of schizophrenia, which is only there because the people at the hospital, if they went to check with the police, there's nothing on record of there being a problem in the neighborhood. So every time I go in and I say there are problems in the neighborhood, it doesn't get addressed by the doctors. So it's just a huge mess, and I just need things kind of ironed out.
That's the frustration that I hear from a lot of people who are managing their healthcare, like, and are in compliance, is that like people will use that kind of as the cudgel to be dismissive.
Yeah.
Not to hear people out, and I'm going to be like, no, I know a lot of people with schizophrenia that are managing their care, and then they realize when it's becoming too much, or that they need to go have another evaluation. I'm like, and those individuals, I was like, my heart breaks for, because I'm going to get lumped into people who will look at me. I know they have the diagnoses,
right?
And then also tell me I'm going to not comply. Like, as soon as I leave here, I'm not doing anything.
Right. Yeah. So I'm compliant right now because I'm fearful that my neighbor is going to call again and bring out Netcare. All I've been trying to do is communicate with her, and she is not responding back in any form. I think that she's under the impression if she does enough of these, that she's going to get me to be able to be permanently removed from my home, and I'll be sent to an institution to live. So I
I would argue for her sake, I would be like, you don't realize, I'm like, those died with Reagan. So
right.
Not even do everything is about community release. That will I have people who I would love actually to have bring that back, because they are non-compliant. They have no issue in being, they have no future sight of wanting to be compliant. But we're just, obviously the system is never coming back.
Right.
So, so that's kind of the thing of where we're at right now. So I'll have to do some deep diving in terms of and whatever you feel comfortable with sharing with me as far as the mental health component stuff, because I work very closely with MCR and Netcare, and now we're going to have our own personalized unit through the public health department that's separate from Netcare. I'm just curious with the hospitalizations, is this how you leverage that by calling, and then were you often when you called?
I was pretty much taken in every single time. There were so many wellness checks and everything that came to my door. It was like nonstop. And what happened was I had one pink slip that happened, I think, in 2017. And somehow she found out about it, because in the next year, 2018, there were 5 or 6 evaluations that were performed all by the police. And she was calling the police about all these things. Once that happened, and I had been evaluated so many times and given a diagnosis of unspecified paranoia, then all of a sudden things changed over to stays of detention or orders of detention. And that's the only thing that's been used since then. So those are competency hearings. That's basically my neighbor saying to Netcare and the police that I can't take care of myself. That's ridiculous. And it's happened over and over and over and over again.
It's interesting that an individual who is not involved in your care in any significant way is able to have that kind of leverage, because they can do the well-being checks, but I'm doing an evaluation. So how do the Netcare evaluators really, how does that interaction go?
Right. Well, it didn't go so great. I have told them that whoever keeps feeding them information, they need to stop doing that. I asked once, and they said that it was anonymous and that they couldn't tell me where they got the information from. So I actually recently got the records from Netcare to see if I could find out exactly who has been calling in all the time. And because I have license plate numbers and information that Netcare was out at her house, I know that she's responsible for performing quite a few of them. So that's kind of how I was able to figure all this stuff out.
Oh, wow. Geez, I was thinking that was because when, Sergeant Castro had called me, she had said that it was like, see what she had alluded to, because I thought she was talking about like car thefts and things, or maybe just like breaking in.
I did have a whole bunch of home invasions as well that happened during like 2017 to 2019. Those have stopped. I don't know how they got in, but things were stolen. I had mail stolen. There was all this stuff that happened. So I don't know what's going on in the neighborhood, but there are a lot of secrets, and I've been targeted. That's very clear. I think that somehow Patty, my neighbor, believes that I'm some sort of criminal or something and need to be moved out of the neighborhood. And I think her way of doing that is through the mental evaluation process and through the stay of detention. So she needs to kind of stop that because it is healthcare fraud, basically, what she's doing. I don't know how many other people.
Things, I mean, it would also be, not a reason for removal. So I do removals for houses and stuff. Like I'm really intimately working with our zone attorneys on stuff for nuisance abatements, and even just educating her on the process, which I'm kind of hesitant to do because she might weaponize it, just to be like, that is just not a thing.
Right.
You can have all the domestic violence runs at your house you want. I'm like, that will also not be a qualifier to remove you from the neighborhood.
Right.
It has to transcend beyond your own personal dormitory. And so if, the mental health stuff was going, that you were going over to her house and smashing her windows, maybe.
Right. That would be reasonable. But yeah.
Obviously, I have a gentleman who I'm trying to work with right now that takes a machete and rifles and everything else, and I can't get him removed.
Oh my gosh.
So, and the neighbors are pretty upset and fearful all the time.
Sure.
This is going to go manic, and so it's one of those things where I'm like, if that doesn't give you grounds, setting stuff on fire, for example, is not grounds to remove somebody from the neighborhood.
Right. Yeah,
how is that happening?
I think that she was told that by somebody, that if you do enough of these, that there's going to be enough of a paper trail that would be justification to get me relocated.
All happening because, I'm on that zone. I don't hear, an address, listing those kinds of descriptions coming. So when is she calling in on you? What times of the day?
I believe that she's in close contact with Netcare at this point. When Netcare comes out, they ask their 5 questions. I tell them exactly what's going on. I tell them that, my neighbors are harassing me. And then 4 days later, a stay of detention occurs. And it's insane. I'm probably the single individual who has had the most hospitalizations in 4 years than anybody. I mean, 22 is a lot.
Well, I guess because there's still the issue of you having going through the emotional labor of that. Obviously, asking an officer in terms of, and somebody who specifically deals with mental health clients, I'm not going to be a good indicator of telling you what the average is.
Right.
Because I am not alarmed by 22 as just if you were running my anecdote.
Wow.
I have taken somebody 3 times in one day, one actively trying to jump off the bridge.
Oh my gosh.
And sometimes, because our mental health system is limping on, in my opinion. And so and I can hear a lot of clients' frustrations in various avenues. I work really closely with people doing this work. They are very frustrated.
Yeah.
And, baseline, for example, for different individuals, I would be told that, like, somebody being violent is their baseline. And I was like, well, I was under the impression that if you were violent, that was a reason to trigger, an evaluation. But you're telling me that this person is just always going to be violent, question mark?
Right.
So, and that means they just get to stay in their neighborhood. I was like, I think we need a better. So I'm with you kind of on trying to figure out exactly better ways to move this process forward. Hearing people's testimonies like yourself who has lived through this, that I'm kind of like, it's really leading more towards the activists and the advocates in this space of saying there's some problems going on here.
And that's what I've really needed from the police. And, because I'm not in a position of authority. So with me going around and asking my neighbors to tell me what they've heard, it's just not getting anywhere. And it's just extremely frustrating. And Patty believes that my anger is somehow a display of my mental illness. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm mad at you. And she just doesn't, she's not making the connection. She's elderly. She's maybe pushing 80 years old. It's just, it's just very hard to get through to her because she believes that the people that came into the neighborhood were the government and were honest and told her everything that was truthful.
Yeah.
And that needs to be fixed.
And it's hard for a generational thing, too, because, you have to build trust and rapport. That's always, like, the biggest thing when somebody's presenting information. I always find it fascinating that a random individual can do that if somebody already has their suspicions or is just, like, lends themselves or suggest themselves to that kind of information. And when you try to counterfactual, it's so much harder because you need to be in community and in trust circle with that person, because they're going to be like, well, why am I not suspicious of you just being like going over with him and just backing his side?
Right. And I think that she's suspicious of me being a drug dealer, and that's a problem. So there are just all these misnomers that have kind of been spread around the neighborhood that have created a huge problem. And I think, if I'm correct, that my neighbor believes that whatever the rumors were came from the government. And, I think that's where all of this kind of came from. And where she got her assumptions confused with what the government thinks.
What is your address by chance?
It's 434 Midgard Road, Midgard. And the zip code is 43202.
Excuse me.
Oh, bless you.
I've never heard that address ever go out over the radio.
That's good.
So, yeah, I just never heard that one. Not during at least my hours. So
yeah, the problem I've had early with the police was the community officers who would come out and perform the evaluations. They were the same ones over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And then when I tried to get help by dialing 911 and trying to report some of these things that have happened about the ex-tenant and about, everything else that is going on, they refused to take the report. So then I started, when I got the information from this summer with the 911 calls, I started to call the community liaison officers to try and get some intervention, because they specialize in things going on in a neighborhood. And this is a neighborhood issue.
Yeah.
Because it's affected many more people than myself and my one neighbor, because the lies were spread all over the community. So I tried with Officer Hicks, and after 13 phone calls, I got one return phone call, and he basically said to me that my story sounded like a conspiracy theory. and he was no longer going to be the community liaison officer, that it was going to be a new one. So I began emailing her, and this is Officer Myers. I've now emailed her 11 times stating what various crimes have occurred, and she's got a copy of that. So does the Internal Affairs Bureau. I've emailed them 26 times, spelling out all of the crimes that have happened. And I've got documentation and evidence of all the crimes. So I can back up what I say. What the problem is that everybody believes that what I'm telling them are delusional beliefs and that it's all not true. So I'm prepared to inform you guys of all the information.
Yeah.
And give you all the details. It's lengthy, but I'm trying to get my life back on track here, and the best way to do that is to dispel the rumors that have happened in the neighborhood, and to get people to open up about what they've been told. So
yeah. Well, and two, it may be instructive to just kind of when you're trying to do base building or community building within the neighborhood to kind of like bring everybody closer together. It might not be so much instructive or illuminating trying to figure out exactly what rumors happen to everybody, because you're also still somewhat in a highly transient area. I don't know how much neighbors are moving out, because there should be apartment complexes and things like that in that section, right? Like some renting and owned homes.
Actually, the neighborhood I live in, there has not been one for sale sign in any yard in a number of years. There's been like one right up the street. It is a very stable neighborhood of homeowners. And yeah, it's huge. I live basically at the beginning of the Walhalla Ravine. So it's a very desirable area. And if I am considered to be undesirable, then it would behoove the people to get me out of the neighborhood. The reason I want to get to the bottom of everything is because if they were told that I had a mental illness, that happened. The whole thing about a mental illness is that it wasn't there when the men talked to them about it to my neighbor in 2019.
Okay.
So there was no severe mental illness going on. Now my neighbor believes that I'm severely mentally ill and that I'm not able to take care of myself. So if she was told that by these imposters, I need to know that information, because that'll help me resolve the whole issue of a diagnosis that's been given just because they saw me in there so many times.
Yeah, but also, may also be, and we've done this before when we do community education sessions with people that are in the know, like that do this work, just so that everybody doesn't run to random conclusions when it comes to mental health. And we see this a lot, especially I'm dealing with a lot of mothers that have kids that struggle with mental illness. They will just predispose everything to that category. Everything becomes that. You don't want to take out the trash, it's your schizophrenia.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, we're skipping some steps here. A kid at 14 may not want to take out the trash and leave their Fortnite game.
Right.
Like that's not schizophrenia, and they need to go down to Nationwide Children's Hospital. It's just kind of the immediacy and sadly, like the linear focus that a lot of our conversations are centered around. So everyone's like, medication, intervention, anytime I'm pushed in a situation with discomfort, it's obviously this person's X, Y, and Z.
Right. And the problem I've had too is with my friends, learning that I have been given a diagnosis, so they don't believe any of my story at all. So I'm just like, I'm not believed by any of my friends. I'm not believed by my mom, who says I've got a mental illness. I'm not believed by the neighbors of anything. And oh my God, it has become a nightmare in my life. And I just need some of the pressure in the neighborhood to not go on me anymore. I'm a single gay man, And occasionally I have people over to my house, and my neighbor has told my fraternity brothers that, there are drug dealers that come over to my house. It's fucking ridiculous, the stuff that I've had to go through. And I really need the police's help in trying to mediate some of this stuff and get to the bottom of what's going on.
Well, we also have other agencies within the department too that I could probably bring along because they're supposed to be for neighbor-to-neighbor mediation, like so the Department of Neighborhoods, some other entities, because especially in Clintonville,
Yeah,
the police in Clintonville are at an interesting time right now. So, in terms of whether or not I would even be respected as an authority, as being somebody who often has the same kind of community meetings and going to an area, Clintonville will often talk about North and South Linden, which is typically predominantly where I serve. And they will basically speak for them, and I will go to their meetings, and they'll be like, I'm sorry, who said what?
right.
I'm like, I know, it's wildly disconnected. There's a lot of people who are getting more attention, louder voice. I was like, because of where they are. And then speaking for other people, I'm like, so I would be very, very mindful of that politic dynamic in your area.
Yeah.
That even coming as an officer, I'm like, I'll be expecting a whole lot of distrust and a whole lot of, so I may have to have some backup myself.
Right.
In terms of like, employing other city entities that they would be more inclined to listen to than, law enforcement.
I actually tried to get the police mediation center involved in what was going on by giving them a copy of a letter that I gave to two neighbors on Como. And I waited probably about 3 months, and then I went in person to speak with the mediation center about the letter I wrote. And they informed me that somebody had called and said that they were me. So somebody impostered me with the police mediation center. They couldn't remember what I, quote, said to them, but obviously one of the two households had somebody call them and pretend to be me and speak about the letter that I wrote. So there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on, and there was an effort to get me out of the neighborhood. There really was. And I've done nothing wrong. I'm doing nothing illegal. I feel like a criminal inside of my own neighborhood, and I think it's been spread mostly because of lies and assumptions.
Well, then also not a whole lot of understanding and empathy, because like if you're struggling with a mental health diagnosis, like that does not automatically mean everything you say falls into that diagnosis and therefore is dismissed.
Right.
So, and I think that's our natural disposition. And so, does it make it difficult? I'm like, depending on the diagnosis to do investigation, absolutely. I'm not going to lie.
Right.
But what I will say is that we always should extend good faith and try to be like, okay, what is the best solution? Let's dig a little deeper. Let's figure it out, and then help everybody and the individuals involved to work through it. And then we'll figure out where we land from there. So instead of automatically referring to a diagnosis and saying it's all this.
I am so glad to hear that, and I am so grateful. I really, really am. I could really use some help.
Yeah, it's the best thing that I can offer. I'll start digging because you've got a lot you've given me. I'll put in my notes here.
Yeah, and if you want, I'm more than willing to forward all the information that I've got in the form of emails and stuff like that. It's a little lengthy, and if you're not used to reading a lot, it would be a lot of information, but I've documented everything. I've journaled everything as it was happening, and I've got a lot of evidence to back up what I'm saying. And I have only presented things to the police that I can actually verify.
Okay.
So.
those are things too. Yeah, if you want to forward some of that, I'll give you my email.
Okay.
So when you get a moment.
Yeah, I'm ready with the pen.
Okay, it's going to be S as in Sam.
Okay.
All.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yep. S as in Sam.
Yep.
T as in Paul.
Okay.
L as in Lincoln. U as in Union. T as in Tom. Z as in Zebra. At columbuspolice.org. The usual handle that you've probably used to emailing with the other guys and girls. So mine is just SP Lutz.
Got it. Yeah.
And that way, you can send me some of the stuff. Kind of let me know like the areas, the people, kind of like the address, all that kind of jazz. That way, I can just kind of follow up and see kind of how the workflow has been done. Reach out to some of my friends, and then we'll kind of see what's the best mediation plan going forward. Because ultimately, you know, we're even with all the evidence, what we ultimately want, and from what I hear from you, is that we want a resolution in terms of like community.
Absolutely.
Having the neighborhood not be suspicious, having the neighborhood have a healthier relationship with everybody, and then also for everybody to be respectful of everybody's mental health, which I think is ultimately the goal.
Exactly. That sounds like a perfect plan. I will get on that probably this weekend and get that information to you. And I really enjoyed talking with you, and thank you so much for your help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will keep you posted via email, text, whatever is the best medium, and what I end up finding out.
Sounds great. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Thank you. Bye. What do you think of that? Now, I'm very proud that our city has such fine people working for the people. Thank the Lord. I'm finally being heard.